The last cold breath of winter clawed across the San Juan Mountains when Elijah Caddick rode into Silverton. The sun had already slipped behind the jagged peaks, leaving the sky bruised in shades of purple and ash gray. Wind scraped down the empty street, dragging loose snow across the frozen mud like restless ghosts searching for warmth they would never find. Eli needed supplies, coffee, ammunition, maybe a quiet moment without memories clawing at him. 3 winters had passed since scarlet fever stole his wife Margaret and their daughter Emma. 3 winters of silence in an empty cabin. 3 winters of wondering why he bothered staying alive. But Silverton was the kind of place where fate had a way of finding a man, even when he wasn't looking for it. He was tying his Appaloosa sergeant outside the general store when something tugged at the corner of his vision. Movement where there shouldn't be any. He turned his head. In the far corner of the boardwalk, nearly hidden behind a stack of empty crates, a woman knelt in the snow. Apache by the cut of her doeskin dress and the beadwork on her worn shawl. Her shoulders hunched against the cutting wind. Her long dark hair tangled with frost like a widow's veil made of ice. But it wasn't the woman that stopped Eli's breath. It was the children. A boy, maybe 7 years old, stood in front of his mother and sister like a shield made of bone and desperate courage. In his small fist, he clutched a knife no longer than a man's finger. His jaw was set hard as granite. His dark eyes burned with a fire no child his age should carry. Behind him, a little girl sat on her mother's lap. No more than 4 years old, her lips had gone the color of winter sky, her cheeks raw and cracked from days of exposure. She wasn't crying. She was too weak for tears. Then Eli saw the thing that would haunt him for the rest of his days. The mother held a piece of bread in her trembling hands, stale, hard as stone, the last morsel they possessed in this world. She broke it in half, then broke it again. The largest piece went to her son, the second largest to her daughter. The smallest fragment, barely enough to sustain a sparrow, she kept for herself. Eli felt something crack open in his chest. He had witnessed hunger before, real hunger, the kind that hollowed out a person's eyes and left nothing but animal desperation behind. He had seen it in cavalry camps during the Apache campaigns, in mining towns forgotten by God and government alike, in the faces of men who had lost everything except the will to take one more breath. But this was different. This wasn't just poverty. This was a mother choosing to starve so her children might survive one more day. This was love so fierce and absolute that it burned brighter than any fire. A group of men stumbled out of the Lucky Strike saloon across the street. 5 of them, drunk on rot-gut whiskey and looking for entertainment. One spotted the Apache family and laughed. The sound was ugly as breaking glass. "Look at that, boys," he slurred, pointing. "Beggars squatting in our town." He scooped a handful of snow, packed it tight around a jagged stone, and hurled it at the boy. It struck the child's shoulder hard enough to spin him sideways. The boy didn't flinch, didn't retreat. He only pulled his sister closer and raised that pitiful little knife. Then another drunk threw, this one aimed at the girl. The rock-packed snowball.
I'm not asking for discarded items.
I didn't come here to turn my back.
Ball hit her temple with a sick thud. Blood bloomed bright red against her pale skin, dripping down onto the white snow like a wound torn in winter itself. The mother cried out, clutching her daughter. The boy stepped forward, knife extended, ready to die defending his family. No one on the boardwalk moved to intervene. Respectable citizens of Silverton walked past the scene with the same cold indifference they might show a stray dog being kicked behind the livery stable. Eli's hand found the Colt before his mind caught up. The shot split the sky like thunder rolling down from the mountains. Everyone froze. "Back away!" His voice carried no heat, no anger, just cold certainty, like the sound of a coffin lid closing. "Right now!" The drunks scattered like roaches caught in lamplight. But one turned back, face twisted with contempt. "You protecting Apache now, Caddick. Wait till Draven hears about this." The name hit Eli like a fist. Cornelius Draven, owner of the Blackstone Mining Company, the man who controlled half the town's economy and most of its souls. Eli didn't respond. He holstered his weapon and walked toward the family. Up close, the mother looked even more exhausted than he had imagined. Dark circles carved deep beneath her eyes like bruises that would never heal. cheekbones sharp enough to cut paper. But when she raised her head to meet his gaze, there was no pleading in her expression, no begging, only dignity, wounded but unbroken. "That knife won't save you, son," Eli said to the boy, keeping his voice gentle. "But the courage to hold it might." The door to the general store banged open. Horace Tuttle waddled out, his considerable belly straining against a stained apron, face flushed red with righteous indignation. "Caddock, don't you dare stick your nose in this. That Apache woman owes me $280. Her dead husband's debt. She don't deserve charity until every cent is paid." Eli studied the woman. "Your husband?" "Joseph Gray Hawk." Her voice was hoarse but steady as bedrock. "He died 4 months ago, in the Blackstone mine collapse." Eli knew that disaster. 23 men entombed alive when the main shaft gave way. The company blamed an Apache worker named Joseph Gray Hawk, called him a thief who stole dynamite and accidentally triggered the cave-in. The whole territory accepted the story because dead men couldn't defend themselves. He looked at the woman's face, at the way she held her injured daughter, at the quiet fire burning behind her exhausted eyes. He didn't see a criminal's widow. He saw a survivor surrounded by wolves. Eli reached into his coat and withdrew his leather wallet. Inside lay $300, everything he had earned selling his small herd last autumn. Money meant to buy feed and supplies to survive the coming months. He counted out $280 and threw the bills at Tuttle's feet. They scattered across the bloody snow like fallen leaves. "Debt's cleared," Eli said. "She doesn't owe you another cent. Not now. Not ever." Tuttle's mouth worked open and closed, but no sound emerged. The street went silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Eli turned to the woman. "Storm's coming down from the peaks, a killing storm. You have 2 choices, freeze to death in this alley or come to my ranch until it passes." Suspicion flared in her dark eyes. "Why? What do you want from us?" Eli looked at the blood trickling down the little girl's face, at the boy still clutching his inadequate weapon, at the crumb of bread in the mother's palm, small as a broken promise. 3 years ago, scarlet fever took my wife and daughter in the same week," he said quietly. "I couldn't save them."
She's getting weaker, Val.
I won't let her die in this house.
Couldn't do anything but watch them slip away. Maybe I can't save anyone, but I won't stand by while children die in the snow. The woman studied his face for a long moment, weighing his words, searching for the lie that experience had taught her to expect from white men. Then the little girl coughed, a wet, rattling sound that spoke of pneumonia already taking root, of death waiting patiently around the corner. The mother's resistance crumbled. "I am Iana," she said. "This is my son Dakota, my daughter Chenoa. Elijah Caddock. Folks call me Eli." He gestured toward his wagon down the street. "We need to move. Now." The first snowflakes began falling as they climbed aboard. Soft and gentle at first, almost peaceful. By the time they cleared the edge of town, those flakes had transformed into a white wall of fury. Wind screamed down from the San Juan peaks at 40 miles an hour. Temperature plummeted below zero. Visibility dropped to arm's length. 2 miles from town, the wagon's front wheel struck a buried rock. The impact shattered the spokes like dry kindling. Eli stared at the wreckage, then at the frozen hell swirling around them. 10 miles still to go, on foot, through a blizzard that could freeze a man solid in 15 minutes. Chenoa was burning with fever despite the cold. Her breathing had deteriorated to shallow, desperate gasps. No choice remained, no time for doubt. Eli lifted the little girl from her mother's arms and pressed the child against his chest, wrapping his heavy coat around them both. "Follow my footsteps exactly," he told Iana. "Don't stop moving, not for anything." He hoisted Dakota onto his back. The boy wrapped thin arms around Eli's neck and held on with the strength of absolute terror. And they walked, into the white void, into the screaming wind, into a darkness that wanted nothing more than to swallow them whole. Every step was agony. Snow reached past his knees, sometimes his thighs. The wind cut through clothing like razors forged from ice. He could feel Chenoa's heartbeat against his ribs, faint and fluttering, a candle flame guttering in a hurricane. Behind him, Ayana stumbled and nearly fell. He caught her arm without breaking stride. "Keep moving," he said through lips already going numb. "Your children need you alive." She found her footing, kept walking. Time lost all meaning. The world compressed to the crunch of snow and the howl of wind and the desperate rhythm of footsteps. One boot forward, then the other. Again. Again. Dakota's arms trembled violently around Eli's neck, but the boy refused to let go. Chenoa had stopped coughing. That silence terrified Eli more than the storm itself. Then through the swirling white curtain, he glimpsed it, a faint orange glow, impossibly distant but undeniably real. His cabin. "Almost there," he called back, though the wind shredded his words. "Just a little more." They stumbled the final 100 yards like survivors crawling from a shipwreck. Snow had drifted against the cabin walls high as the windowsills. Eli kicked the door open and they collapsed inside, falling onto the rough wooden floor in a tangle of frozen limbs. The cabin was cold as a mausoleum, but it was shelter. It was life. Eli forced himself upright, built a fire with hands so numb he could barely grip the matches. The kindling caught. Flames grew. Heat began pushing back against the deadly chill. He laid Chenoa on the buffalo hide rug near the hearth and started rubbing her small arms and legs, forcing blood back into tissue that had gone the color of old wax. "Breathe, little one," he whispered. "Stay with me. Don't let go." The girl didn't respond. Her chest barely moved. Ayana knelt beside him, tears freezing on her cheeks before they could fall. Dakota stood behind them, fists clenched white, watching his sister with eyes that had aged decades in a single night. All through the darkness, Eli worked, warming the child's body,
What if they break in?
Then I'll hold them back.
talking to her constantly, refusing to surrender her to the cold. Somewhere in those desperate hours, as the blizzard raged outside like a beast denied its prey, something began to shift, not just in the cabin, in Eli himself. A door he had locked and barred 3 years ago, the night he buried his wife and daughter in frozen ground, began to crack open. When dawn finally crept through the frost-covered windows, painting the room in shades of pale gold, Chenoa opened her eyes. She looked up at the stranger who had carried her through the storm, the man who had stayed awake all night fighting to keep her alive. And she spoke, soft as snowfall. "Thank you." Eli turned away quickly, but Ayana saw the moisture glistening in his eyes. And deep in her heart, something she had believed dead began stirring back to life. The storm held them captive for 3 days. Snow piled halfway up the windows. Wind moaned through every gap in the cabin walls like voices of the restless dead. Inside, 4 strangers learned to share space, to breathe the same air, to exist in each other's presence without walls between them. Eli taught Dakota how to care for Sargent, how to check the Appaloosa's hooves for stones, how to brush the coat following the direction of hair growth, how to read the horse's mood through the position of its ears. "A horse isn't just an animal," Eli explained, guiding the boy's small hands along the curry brush. "He's your partner. Treat him well, and someday he might be the only thing standing between you and death." Dakota absorbed every word like parched earth drinking rain. These were lessons his father never had time to teach before the mountain swallowed him whole. From the barn doorway, Ayana watched. Late afternoon sunlight slanted through the gaps in the boards, catching in her dark hair like threads of amber woven through silk. After 4 months of grief and terror and running, she finally saw her son smile. When the storm broke on the 4th morning, trouble arrived with the clearing sky. Word had spread through Silverton faster than wildfire through August grass. Elijah Caddick, the hermit rancher who never bothered anyone, was sheltering an Apache family, living under the same roof, eating at the same table. Reverend Josiah Crane rode up to the ranch that Sunday afternoon, Bible clutched against his narrow chest like armor. "You're bringing shame upon this community," he declared from horseback, refusing Eli's offer to dismount and speak inside. "Send these people away or face the consequences." Eli leaned against the porch post, arms folded across his chest. "Reverend, I seem to recall your Bible saying something about caring for widows and orphans." You want to remind me which part tells me to let children freeze? Crane's face went the color of raw beef. He yanked his horse around and galloped away without another word. But consequences came regardless of biblical arguments. Within a week, Eli lost his contract supplying beef to the mining company. First Mountain Bank refused to extend his credit line. Tuttle's General Store wouldn't sell him supplies at any price. "They're strangling you," Ayanna said one evening, watching Eli sharpen his hunting knife by the fire. Orange light danced along the blade's edge. "Because of us." "Let them squeeze," Steele whispered against Whetstone. "I've been choked before. Still breathing." She wanted to argue, to insist they should leave before his life was completely destroyed. But Chenoa was sleeping through entire nights now without coughing, and Dakota had started laughing again, a sound Ayanna had believed silenced forever when Joseph died. She couldn't steal that from her children, not yet, perhaps not ever.
You'll lose everything because of us.
If I hadn't kept you, I would have lost everything.
On the 10th day, violence came hunting. Eli had escorted Dakota to the one-room schoolhouse in town. The boy desperately wanted to learn reading and writing. He wanted to honor his father, who had taught himself English from borrowed books and dreamed of a better life. When Dakota emerged that afternoon, blood dripped from his split lip. His shirt hung in tatters. Bruises were already darkening around his left eye. "What happened?" Eli's voice dropped to a register that made veteran soldiers nervous. Dakota's jaw tightened. "They called my mother a filthy word. I made them stop." "You fought back?" "I hit the one who said it. Hit him until he fell down." Eli knelt until his eyes were level with the boy's. He reached out and gently wiped blood from Dakota's chin. "Good. Some things in this world are worth fighting for. Your mother's honor stands at the top of that list." He straightened and rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Tomorrow, I'll teach you how to throw a proper punch. So next time, you only need one." That night, after both children had fallen asleep, Ayanna told Eli the truth. They sat across from each other at his rough-hewn table, a single oil lamp casting dancing shadows on the log walls. Outside, wind whispered through pine branches. Inside, secrets finally found voice. Joseph Gray Hawk hadn't been a thief, hadn't stolen dynamite, hadn't caused the collapse that entombed 23 men in darkness forever. Joseph had been a witness. For months, he watched Cornelius Dravin cut corners throughout the Blackstone mine. Support timbers that should have been reinforced every season were left to rot until they crumbled. Ventilation shafts required by territorial law were never constructed. Men developed the black lung cough and died slowly, and Dravin did nothing because fixing problems cost money he preferred keeping in his own pocket. Joseph documented everything in secret. Names of men who died from accidents that proper safety measures would have prevented. Dates when inspectors were bribed to look elsewhere. A copy of Draven's own signed order reducing timber expenditures by 40%. He kept all of it in a tin box, preparing to send the evidence to the federal marshal in Denver. "The week before he died," Ayanna said, her voice barely above a whisper, "Joseph rode out to your ranch. He said he was buying horse feed, but when he came home, he told me something strange." Eli leaned forward. "What did he say?" "He said he had hidden the box somewhere safe, somewhere Dravin would never think to search, somewhere the truth would survive even if he didn't." Her eyes glistened in the lamplight. "I never understood what he meant, but he came here, Eli, to your ranch, 3 days before the mine collapsed." The realization struck Eli like a physical blow. Joseph Greyhawk had chosen his ranch as the hiding place. The cabin of the one man in the territory who didn't work for Dravin, didn't owe Dravin money, didn't fear Dravin's power. "The tin box might still be here," Eli said slowly, "somewhere on this property." "If it exists," Ayanna replied, "if Dravin hasn't already found it, Dravin doesn't know it's here. If he did, he would have burned this place years ago." Eli's jaw tightened. "We need to find it." But before they could begin searching, the enemy came calling. 3 in the morning, the 14th night. Hoofbeats shattered the silence like gunshots. Eli grabbed his Winchester and eased onto the porch. Cold air bit his face. Moonlight turned the snow-covered yard silver as spilled mercury. 5 riders sat motionless in a line, torchlight throwing demonic shadows across their faces. At their head sat Virgil Kincaid, Draven's personal enforcer, a former bounty hunter with a scar running from temple to jaw. A man who performed dirty work for wages and enjoyed it for free. Caddock, Kincaid's voice rasped like a file on rusted iron. Mr. Draven sends his regards and a message. Eli raised the Winchester. The barrel pointed steady as a compass needle at Kincaid's chest. I'm listening. Send the Apache woman away. Forget whatever lies she's been whispering. Do that, and you'll have your contracts back by week's end. Refuse, and things become unpleasant. Tell Draven something for me. Eli's thumb drew back the hammer. The click echoed across the frozen yard. If he wants to threaten me, he can ride up here himself. I don't waste words on errand boys. Kincaid's scarred face twisted into something resembling a smile. You're making a fatal mistake, cavalryman. Wouldn't be my first. Now get off my land before I ventilate something you'll miss. The standoff stretched for 10 heartbeats. 20. Then Kincaid wheeled his horse and galloped into darkness, the others following like shadows fleeing sunrise. Eli didn't lower the rifle until the hoofbeats faded completely, but he knew with absolute certainty that the real fight was only beginning. Over the following days, harassment escalated steadily. Mysterious footprints appeared around the barn each morning. A rifle shot shattered the kitchen window at dinner time, missing Chenoa's head by inches. Someone cut the fence line and scattered Eli's remaining cattle into the high mountain wilderness. Eli prepared for siege. He dug rifle pits at strategic points around the ranch. He taught Ayanna to handle the double-barreled shotgun. Don't aim, he instructed. Just point at center mass and squeeze both triggers. At close range, you can't miss. He showed Dakota the hidden root cellar beneath the kitchen floor. If shooting starts, you grab your sister and get down there. Pull the hatch closed and don't come out until you hear my voice. Understand? The boy nodded, face pale but resolved. On the 21st day, Judge Absalom Webb rode to the ranch. Webb was a federal circuit judge who traveled between territorial courts. He was 62 years old, with a white beard like winter frost and eyes that had witnessed too much death to be deceived by comfortable lies. He and Eli had served together in the cavalry years ago, chasing Apache raiders across the Arizona hellscape. You're kicking a hornet's nest the size of a barn, Webb said, settling into a chair by Eli's fire. Draven has connections reaching all the way to the territorial governor. You can't beat him with bullets. I'm not trying to beat him. I'm trying to protect this family long enough for the truth to surface. What truth? What evidence do you possess? None yet. But Joseph Gray Hawk hid documentation of Draven's crimes somewhere on this property before he died. We're going to find it. Webb studied Ayanna across the room, watched her helping Chenoa practice letters on a slate board, observed Dakota reading aloud from a primer, sounding out words with growing confidence. I'll do what I can from Denver, Webb said finally. But watch your back, Eli. Draven didn't build his empire by leaving witnesses breathing. That night after Webb departed, Eli made a decision that surprised even himself. He rode to the county clerk's office at first light and purchased a marriage license. That evening, he presented the document to Ayanna. This isn't about the town, he said, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he held out the paper. Not about Reverend Crane or the gossips. This is because I want you and the children to stay, because this cabin has been silent as a tomb for 3 years, and you filled it with something I thought I'd never feel again. Ayanna stared at the license, then raised her eyes to his face. You don't understand what I might cost you. I understand exactly what you might cost me. His voice roughened. I'm choosing anyway. She didn't answer with words. Instead, she reached out and took his hand. Her grip was firm and warm and certain, and two people who had lost everything discovered they still had something left to give. Cornelius Draven had never been a patient man. On the 25th night, patience abandoned him entirely. 15 riders descended on the ranch under cover of darkness. Torches blazed against the black sky like eyes of approaching demons. At their head rode Draven himself on a pale horse, the burn scar twisting his neck visible even in flickering firelight. Eli heard them coming. Years of cavalry service had taught him to sleep light and wake ready. He shook Ayanna's shoulder. Take the children to the cellar. Lock the hatch. Don't open it for anyone but me. She didn't argue, didn't waste precious seconds with questions or tears. She gathered Chenoa in her arms, grabbed Dakota's hand, and vanished through the kitchen. Eli checked his Winchester, confirmed the Colt rode secure on his hip. Then he stepped onto the porch to meet what was coming. Draven pulled his horse to a stop 40 yards from the cabin. Torchlight carved harsh shadows across his face, making him look like something summoned from hell itself. Last chance, Caddock. His voice carried across the frozen night like poison spreading through water. Give me the Apache woman. Forget whatever stories she's told you. I'll restore your contracts, add $500 cash, and we'll pretend this unfortunate situation never occurred. Eli raised the Winchester to his shoulder. The front sight settled center on Draven's chest. Counter offer, right away now, and I won't put you in the ground next to the 23 men you murdered. Draven laughed. It sounded like bones snapping. You think you can fight 15 armed men alone? You're not that good, cavalryman. Nobody is. Maybe not. Eli's voice remained calm as frozen water. But I can kill at least 5 before you bring me down. Care to gamble on whether you'll be among them? Virgil Kincaid drew first. The Winchester roared. Kincaid flew backward off his horse, shoulder erupting in a spray of dark crimson. Then hell opened its gates. Eli dove behind the water trough as bullets chewed the porch into kindling. He fired back with the mechanical precision of a man who had killed before and made peace with killing again. One rider tumbled from his saddle, then another. Burn it, Draven screamed, voice cracking with fury. Burn everything! 2 men spurred their horses toward the barn, torches raised. Eli shot one clean through the chest. The second hurled his flame before a bullet found him. Dry timber caught instantly. Fire raced up the barn walls like a living creature hungry for destruction. Inside, Sergeant screamed in animal terror. In the root cellar, Dakota heard that scream, heard the horse who had become his friend, his teacher, his connection to the father he'd lost, crying out in mortal fear. The boy didn't think, didn't calculate odds or measure risks. He shoved open the cellar hatch and ran. Dakota, no! Ayana's cry disappeared in the roar of gunfire and flame. The boy sprinted through chaos. Bullets cracked past his head. Smoke burned his eyes, his lungs. He burst into the burning barn, flames licking at the walls all around him, and threw open Sergeant's stall gate. The terrified horse bolted for safety, and then Dakota saw it. In the corner where Eli stored old tack and forgotten equipment, the heat had warped a wooden shelf. Something metallic had tumbled to the floor, glinting in the hellish light. A tin box, dented and scorched but intact. On the lid, barely visible through soot and char, 3 letters had been scratched into the metal. J.G.H. Joseph Greyhawk, his father. Dakota understood in that instant. His father had hidden the truth here, in the barn of the only honest man he knew, gambling that someday it would be found. The boy grabbed the box and ran for his life. Eli, he shouted, bursting from the inferno into the fire-lit chaos of the yard. I found it! My father's box! Draven saw. His face went white as bleached bone. Kill the boy, he screamed. Kill him now! 2 riders wheeled toward Dakota, pistols rising. Eli didn't hesitate, didn't calculate. He exploded from cover and sprinted across open ground toward the child, firing as he ran. One rider fell. The other got off a shot. The bullet tore through Eli's left shoulder, spinning him half around. He didn't stop, didn't slow. He reached Dakota, scooped the boy up, and dove behind the stone well as bullets hammered the frozen earth around them. Blood soaked through Eli's shirt. The world tilted and swam. But he kept his body between Dakota and the guns, shielding the child with everything he had left. In the chaos, no one noticed a small figure slip through the kitchen door. Dakota had told his sister to stay hidden, but Chenoa had other ideas. The 4-year-old girl, still weak from her illness, crept to the back of the cabin where Sergeant stood trembling in the shadows. The horse recognized her scent, allowed her to grab his trailing reins. Chenoa had watched her brother learn to ride, had memorized every word Eli spoke about horses. She climbed onto a fence rail and threw herself across Sergeant's bare back. Go, she whispered. Find help. The horse seemed to understand. He wheeled and galloped into the darkness, carrying the tiny girl toward town. Behind the well, Eli was fading. Blood loss and shock dragged at his consciousness. But he forced his eyes to focus, forced his hands to reload the Winchester. Stay down, he told Dakota. Whatever happens, don't let go of that box. The boy clutched the tin container against his chest like it contained his father's soul, which in a way it did. Then from the east, salvation came riding. Hoofbeats, many of them, coming fast. Judge Absalom Webb appeared at the head of 5 federal marshals, badges gleaming in the firelight like stars fallen to earth. Behind them rode Doc Willard and 6 miners, survivors of the Blackstone collapse, who had finally found courage to speak truth. And leading them all, barely clinging to Sergeant's mane, was Chenoa, the little girl who had ridden 3 miles through darkness to save her family. Cornelius Draven! Webb's voice rang across the battlefield like the trumpet of judgment. You are under arrest for murder, conspiracy, and criminal negligence, resulting in 23 deaths. Draven's men looked around wildly. Half their number lay dead or wounded. Federal marshals had them flanked and outnumbered. One by one, guns clattered to the frozen ground. Hands rose in surrender. Only Draven remained mounted, face contorted with disbelieving rage. He drew his pistol and aimed at Eli's head. If I hang, you're coming with me. Eli stood slowly, blood streaming down his arm. His Colt was still in his hand. He met Draven's eyes without flinching. You've been a coward your whole miserable life, killing workers to save money, murdering an honest man to hide your crimes, terrorizing a widow and her children. He shook his head slowly. Pull that trigger if you want, but you'll still die a coward, and everyone here will remember it. For 5 heartbeats, nobody breathed. Then Draven's gun hand began to shake. The pistol lowered. Marshals moved in and dragged him from his horse in chains. The moment danger passed, Eli's legs gave way. He collapsed in the snow, the world going gray at the edges. Ayanna appeared above him, tears streaming down her face, hands pressing against his wound. Stay with me, she begged. You can't leave us now, not after everything. Doc Willard shouldered through the crowd, medical bag in hand. Let me work. This fool cavalryman is too stubborn to die from a shoulder wound. The last thing Eli saw before darkness claimed him was Chenoa's face. The little girl who had ridden through the night to bring help. She was smiling. 5 days later, church bells rang across Silverton. Not in mourning, in celebration. The pews of the small wooden church overflowed. Widows of the 23 dead miners filled the front rows, wearing their best dresses and expressions of hard-won peace. Former Blackstone workers lined the walls. Even townspeople who had turned their backs on Ayanna came to witness. They came not from affection, but from respect. For a man who had risked everything for strangers, for a woman who had refused to let her husband's memory be erased, for 2 children who had shown more courage than most adults ever would. Eli stood at the altar, his arm still bound in a sling, healing but whole. Ayanna walked toward him down the aisle, wearing a simple white dress the miners' widows had sewn as a gift. Her dark hair was braided with wildflowers. Her face glowed with something she had thought lost forever. Dakota led her, standing straight and proud as any man. Chenoa followed, scattering flower petals from a small basket, giggling with each handful she threw. Reverend Crane performed the ceremony. His voice was notably subdued. He didn't meet Eli's eyes. When the vows were spoken and a simple silver ring placed on Ayanna's finger, Dakota leaned down to whisper in his sister's ear, "We have a father now." Chenoa's smile could have melted winter itself. 3 weeks later, word arrived from Denver. Cornelius Draven would hang when spring thawed the ground enough to dig graves. 23 counts of negligent homicide, 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder, 1 count of attempted murder of a federal witness. The tin box Dakota rescued from the flames contained everything Joseph Gray Hawk had gathered. Names, dates, amounts, and Draven's own signature on documents that condemned him more surely than any testimony. Justice, long delayed, had finally come home. On the evening that news arrived, the family gathered around the fireplace in their rebuilt cabin. Neighbors had come from miles around to help raise new walls and a new barn. The same community that had shunned them now offered hands in friendship. Dakota sat on the floor, reading aloud from a real book now, not just a primer. His voice had grown confident, his words sure. Chenoa slept in her mother's lap, one small hand clutching the rag doll Eli had bought her, the other wrapped around her mother's finger. Ayanna leaned her head against her husband's uninjured shoulder. "What does spring look like from here?" she asked softly. Eli gazed out the window. Snow still crowned the San Juan peaks, but down in the valley, patches of brown earth had begun appearing. Somewhere beneath the white blanket, green things waited to be born. Hard work, he said honestly. We lost almost everything. Have to rebuild the herd from scratch. Clear new pastures, repair fences. Ayana's hand found his. But this time, Eli continued, his voice warming, I won't be building alone. Outside, wind swept down from the mountains, carrying the last bitter breath of winter away. And in a small cabin on the valley floor, 4 people who had found each other through storm and blood and fire finally understood what it meant to be home. Family isn't always about the blood in your veins. Sometimes it's about the choices you make when everything falls apart. And sometimes choosing to stand together is the bravest thing anyone can do. The end. 300 miles away in a cold stone cell in Denver, Cornelius Draven watched snow fall past his barred window and waited for spring. He had plenty of time to think about the Apache miner he had murdered, about the widow he had tried to destroy, about the cavalryman who had stood in his way. But mostly he thought about the 7-year-old boy who had run into a burning barn and emerged carrying the truth. In the end, that was what killed him. Not the rope, the truth. If this story moved you, remember, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's deciding that something matters more than the fear itself. What would you risk for the people you love?
The story leaves a profound lesson about courage, responsibility, and the true meaning of family in life's harshest circumstances. Courage doesn't appear in glamorous forms or celebrated victories, but begins in a very ordinary moment, when a person decides not to turn their back on the suffering of others. The male protagonist doesn't enter the story wanting to be a hero. He's just a man who has lost everything, surviving his loneliness through habit and memories. It is his choice to protect a mother and 2 unfamiliar children that awakens the humanity he thought had died with the previous winter. The greatest lesson of the story lies in the fact that responsibility doesn't always come from blood ties, but from a voluntary decision to shoulder the burden. The family in the story isn't formed by blood, but by actions. Carrying a child through a snowstorm, shielding oneself from gunfire, or being willing to sacrifice a peaceful life to protect the truth. It was these actions that transformed strangers into a true family, stronger than any biological bond. The story also emphasizes that silence in the face of evil is a form of complicity. The town had turned its back on the widow, accepting lies for their convenience and safety. Only when someone dares to stand up and pay the price for the truth can justice prevail. Truth does not triumph on its own. It needs to be carried, protected by blood, tears, and unwavering determination. Ultimately, the story affirms that hope can be reborn even from the ashes. Loss does not disappear. Wounds do not heal on their own, but people can learn to live on by giving life to others. When we choose to stand on the side of what is right, even in fear, we not only save others, we save ourselves.